So here's what we're going to do today. This is not a trucking only program. This is not a introduction to cross-examination program. This is, Dan asked me to if I'd be willing to just sort of think through the things that I do when I'm preparing for and and uh, and taking a cross-examination, and just share the things that I've learned along the way. So I've never done this kind of a presentation before, at least on this subject. So, but what it is it's going to be somewhat stream of conscious. It's going to not always, it's going to sometimes feel discombobulated, but hopefully if you stick through this, hopefully it'll start coming back together by the end. I'm going to use some examples, mostly from depositions, because I don't have a lot of actual trial cross in a format that works for this. And but a lot of it is also going to be lecture, and I really want to invite. Roger has spent a huge part of his career really perfecting and thinking about how to best do this thing called cross-examination. So Roger, I want to have the deal with you today that it's about the people who are listening to this, not about me. If you disagree with what I'm saying, or feel that there's things that I'm leaving out that are important, or just want to put your input into it, put your stamp on it one way or the other, I really want you to do that, because I'll learn from it too. And I'm seeing somebody on chat saying there's no sound. I'm hoping that, can somebody please put on chat that they can hear me so that I know that it's not, okay, good. So, all right, thank you. All right.
There's a lot of people
now, who can hear. It's like my problem. My wife constantly reminds me that there's a difference between a hearing problem and a listening problem. But I'm just joking. That was maybe a bad joke. But so anyway, I just wanted you to please feel free, Roger, to focus in. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk through. I thought really hard with myself on how to try to structure this, and because what we're dealing with here really is sort of, I want to start talking a little bit about the purpose of cross-examination. Then I want to move in to very specifics, but I think we have to recognize that there's really sort of at least three skill sets that we're going to be talking about, three situations. And one of them is preparation, whether you're preparing to cross somebody in front of a jury, in front of a judge, or in front of a video camera for trial later. The preparation part is something that needs to be talked about almost separately, but in a related context to what I'll call the execution of the cross-examination. And in that regard, we'll talk about both execution in terms of in deposition and in terms of trial. And the reason I think it's important, and the reason I've decided to go this way, you can decide if it was a good idea or not, is because, and I think you guys are doing a program or have done one recently that's title is Deposition is Trial. And that is so true. In fact, way back when I was reading Roger's book for the first time, close to 30 years ago, I recognized back then that I'm never going to get as many trials as I would like to have. I'm never probably going to be the lawyer who has 600 or 700 trials, because because I think that's hard to do under any set of circumstances these days. But if you're going to concentrate on bigger cases and fewer numbers of bigger cases, then even more so is it true that there's not the opportunity. Cases, less than 1% of cases end up going to trial, probably less than a fraction of 1% of cases go to trial. And so I recognized early on, when I wanted to be a better cross-examiner, that the best way to do that was to treat the deposition as a trial. And I think that has served me really well in my career. It's also allowed me to hone my skills. It's also allowed me, I think, at the end of the day, to build stronger cases, whether those cases ended up going to trial or ended up getting resolved. Now, I can hear some people already saying, yeah, but what about those cases are going to go to trial? Don't you treat those differently? And the answer is yes. If you absolutely know you're taking the case to trial, which, by the way, 3/4 of the time when I absolutely know the case is going to go to trial, the case settles. So, and it's actually the times I don't think the case is going to go to trial that I end up trying the case. So I don't think you can trust yourself in that regard. But I'm rambling here. But the point that I'm trying to make is we're gonna talk about preparation a lot, and we're going to talk about the execution of cross-examination in different settings, because I think that there are different approaches and different things that are important depending on where you are and what we're doing. And I think that it's a little naive to say we're just going to be cross-examining at trial, and especially in today's. It was true before anybody knew what COVID was, but I think it's going to remain true and be even more importantly true as we move forward from here. Much more is going to be done over some kind of a camera, video, something along the way. So I'm thinking a lot about this, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are thinking a lot about it also, is how we can do this best. So that's the setup, and I think Roger would endorse that. You know, a lot of times when people think about cross-exam, you think of the TV program, and there's some kind of Matlock moment that's getting ready to happen. Somebody's about to admit that they committed the murder, or whatever the case might be. And while those things sometimes happen without preparation, you're increasing your chance for a Matlock moment an awful lot if you do the hard work getting ready for the exam. Anything on that, Roger, before we move on?
Yeah, I totally agree on the preparation. And what I say is 80% of it's preparation, 20% is presentation. It's a 1-to-4 ratio at best. And that's if you get to present, because you're right, it's less than 1% actually goes to trial. I think there's 3 platforms now on cross. One is trial for sure. We all like to talk about that. It doesn't happen very often. I break depositions down into 2 sections now: live deposition, Zoom deposition. Because the Zoom deposition, some of the techniques don't work that you would do in live. Some of the techniques you use in Zoom won't work live. So we have to have 3 different kinds of skill sets. And listen, Matlock was built on Bobby Lee Cook. I mean, that's what they did. They took him and turned into a TV show. If you've ever done anything with Cook, it's all about preparation. I mean, he's wonderful in the courtroom and he's fun to be with, but he prepares his ass off.
And I think another thing I like to say about preparation is good preparation makes you better when you get off your preparation at trial. It makes you better prepared to be spontaneous. I know that sounds weird, but it frees you from constraints that end up tying you up when you should be listening to the witness, and instead you're worrying about your next question, looking at your outline.
Yeah, that's the key to it, Joe. You hit it right on the head. When you're prepared, you listen. You have the ability to listen. If you're not prepared, you're just scared and you can't listen. All right.
So we're going to talk about all those concepts today. Probably leave some things out. I'm not leaving them out by design. My hope is really, to share with you from my heart sort of what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me along the way. And we'll see as we go. So let's, jumping in, I think it's worth just taking a moment. This is a fairly basic concept of, what are the purposes of cross-examination? If we start at at sort of basic level here, we have some obvious purposes, which would include to elicit favorable testimony for our side, or to impeach bad testimony on the other side. But I think that when we broaden that out and start to put some bullet points under that, even the depositions, the cross-examinations that you do in the form of deposition, are preparing you for trial. They're allowing you to size up a witness, And what I mean by that is not only in content, but what's the appearance of the witness? What is the believability, credibility factors of the witness? What are the triggers of the witness? Is the witness going to, what does the witness react to? Knowing those kinds of things, I think helps you be better prepared for what you might choose to do at the trial of the case. You can use these depositions to force witnesses to take a position that their lawyers are leaving very vague, and you're going to hear that a lot in as one of my main purposes, one of my main goals when I'm doing a cross-examination outside of a trial setting, but even inside of a trial setting, is to force somebody to get off the fence. And there's really, you're going to hear, from my perspective, there's only three answers: yes, no, or I don't know. And I have to have a strategy for what I'm going to do with each of those potential answers. I think another purpose of cross-examination, whether you accept it as a purpose or it's a byproduct, is that it says something about you as the lawyer. And it says you're competent or you're not. It says you're prepared or you're not. It says you're a jerk or you're not. It says that you have empathy or you don't. It says that you're a bully or you're not. It says that you're likable and credible, or it says that people ought to be careful about what comes out of your mouth. You're teaching people by how you ask questions and how you treat witnesses a lot about yourself. And I think it's foolish to ignore that reality. There's a lot of ways to say that, but that's the best way I know how to say it. Any comments, Roger? You want on that or not really?
No, there's two things. One is I agree with you. Yes, no, I don't know. But the I don't know has to be I don't know and never will know. Not that they figure it out for trial, because they love to do that. Experts love to do that.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about some of that.
Yeah. And the second thing is, I totally agree about the bully. I judge lawyers in deposition. Hell, I judge lawyers just in a phone call. Is this a guy, is this a woman that the jury's going to like? No one likes bullies. If you're not prepared, you come off as a bully because you have to raise your tone. You have to get aggravated. You have to strut around. If you're prepared, it's calmer. The best players in football, they're so prepared, they look like it's easy. It's not easy. It's because they're prepared, it looks easy.
Yeah, it makes me think of I have a 15-year-old son who's way into Brazilian jiu-jitsu right now. And I love going and watching him fight. And one of the things that always impresses me about him as a young fighter is he's just so calm. I mean, it can look like he is getting his clock cleaned, and it can look like somebody's about to rip one of his limbs off, and he is loose and calm, and you don't see stress on his face. And next thing you know, that calmness, I don't know how it does it, but I think there's an analogy to what we do. Staying in that state, it's almost like when the opportunity opens, you're better able to see it.
Yep.
And then you're better able to process how you ought to deal with it.
Absolutely. Listen, I had the pleasure of representing several Navy SEALs over the years. The first one I represented, I made the mistake of agreeing to go to a bar with him. He was only like 5'8", maybe 160 pounds soaking wet. Somebody starts mouthing off to him, and I said, let's leave. He goes, we're not leaving until we're done drinking. Okay, that's not a good start to the damn thing. These guys are yelling, they're all angry, they're all acting out, and he's very, very calm. No stress on his face. And in about 30 seconds, all three of them are on the floor. I say, how can you be that clinical? He goes, I'm calm inside. I know I'm prepared. It's exactly what you see with really good trial lawyers.
He's also, it also goes to show, that he's also a byproduct of his training, because
Absolutely.
being able to stay calm is a
Yep.
byproduct not only of preparation, but of preparation in the broader sense of training, which, this is why we're on this call, isn't it? Because
Yep.
we've both been trained, and we've still, these years later in doing what we do, I still feel like I'm in training. I'm finally feeling like I've got a pretty good shot at being a pretty decent trial lawyer someday with what I've finally gotten to know after all these years. And I'm saying that somewhat facetiously, but it really is true. I feel like I'm excited all the time about taking it to the next level. And I know you are too, because we've talked about that.
Yeah, it drives me. It's what gets you up in the morning. To everybody, don't measure your success by wins. Don't measure it by money. You'll get enough wins, you'll get enough money. Measure it by, are you getting better?
Yeah, I agree.
When you stop getting better, it's time to go to the bar and just stay there.
And as soon as you think you've gotten it all down, the karmic gods are going to come and bring that 5'8" seal into your life, and you're going to be the person laying on the floor at the end, because their training was superior to yours, and their preparation and execution were superior to yours.
Yep.
It's not, as Jerry Spence always used to say, I'm not really worried about the quote badass lawyer. I'm worried about the new lawyer, brand newly minted lawyer, who can connect and who has the ability to connect in a different way than I do as a seasoned lawyer whose name people know. That's the lawyer I'm most afraid of, because they're the ones who will connect. And I think that Dan and I were talking just before you got on, Roger, about, at the end of the day, isn't trial work really all about connecting and moments that allow you to connect with key jurors along the way? And I believe that to be true. And anybody who's tried enough cases knows exactly what I'm talking about. There's that moment in the courtroom where something just happened. Sometimes it's the feeling of the opposite. You just lost the connection.
Yeah.
But it's palpable.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have. Anyway, go ahead.
I think you cannot connect with a jury till you've connected with your client.
And I think you can't connect with your client until you learn and do as much work on yourself as you can, because that's where understanding yourself is what allows you to connect. I would say to everybody on this call, on this Zoom, that it's not coincidence that whatever the case is you're thinking about right now, the one that is in your office, the one you think about all the time, it's not a coincidence that case is in your office. I think the forces of the universe put that case in your way, and you in that case's way, and that client's way. And that's as much your case as it is your client's case. And I don't mean that you're more important, but I mean that until you figure out how that connection happens, you're not really ready to take on the case. And that's some of the magic of psychodrama and some other things we can talk about in another context. But moving on from here.
Joe, let me just chime in on what you said though, on the connection part, because I think it's really important. And that's the one universal I've seen through all the great trial lawyers I've had the privilege of interviewing on their trials and what they're teaching, their skills, is their awareness and focus on the connection with the jury. And I think that's only possible, as you said, with, I think it only becomes possible if people are totally present, if they're totally calm and totally themselves. And that's only possible if you are prepared. You've practiced being up in front of people as much every opportunity you can. So that way, the same Joe Fried you got sitting in your office chit-chatting behind the desk, or Roger Dodd, is the same Joe Fried that stands up in trial. Except he's just telling a different story. It's a different context, but there's no tension, there's no insecurity, there's no fear. Because you're so ready, and that makes you connectable to the jury.
Well, I'll tell you, for me,
throw that in there.
The only thing I would change, I agree with 98% of what you just said, the only thing I disagree with is, in my world, there's never no fear. In my world, I have to figure out ways to manage that fear, and I don't really want all that fear to go away. That fear kind of helps me, but I have had to go through a process to learn how to make that fear a friend instead of a foe. which does happen through that preparatory process that you're discussing. It's part of what we need to do. And I actually have a section in here later where I'm going to we'll talk more about maybe ways to approach that a little bit if that's an issue that you have too.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I'm always afraid and I'm always insecure. And one of my internal voices is a little girl saying, "You're not good enough." Only she says, "You're not good enough."
Yeah.
But you have to deal that. You have to own that. You have to say, okay, that's part of me. And then admit to it. What's happens is when you admit you're afraid, you're insecure, people embrace you. They make you less fearful. They make you less insecure.
So, I mean, let's use this at this very moment as a teaching moment for all of us. I mean, when you hear somebody who is as phenomenal and accomplished a lawyer as Roger Dodd say out loud that that's his reality, did you connect to him, or did you push him away and say, I feel less of you now than I did before? Our fear is that if we put that out in the world as people who wear suits and are supposed to be professionals and are supposed to be the warrior and nothing is supposed to, we fear that if we show that vulnerability to people, that they will shun us and think less of us. But you just heard it. And check in with yourself about how people are writing. Mark, thank you for saying that. Instant connection. Why? Because my bet is for those of you who felt that connection, you have that in you too. So by Roger making that, being willing to be vulnerable, it's that willingness to be vulnerable that, number one, is going to make it okay for jurors to speak up in jury selection.
Yep.
It's going to make jurors connect to you and your side of the case. The problem is that we have to lose the myth that vulnerability is weakness, and we have to reframe in the idea that willingness to be vulnerable is actually one of the most powerfully strong things. It's one of the most courageous things, strong things that you can learn to do. It takes practice, and like Dan was saying, you have to incorporate it. Don't think you're just going to do it if you walk into a courtroom when you haven't practiced it in every other part of your life, in every relationship that you have, professional relationship, even your intimate relationships, your relationships with your kids, your relationships with your family members. You have to learn to check in, know where you are, recognize the feelings, and then trust that your story of your life is really not all that different than anybody else's. And that gives you power. In fact, I want to move on because I'm still on page 1/2 of my outline. And we're going to be here for 3 days. I'm going to show you my vulnerability. But we're actually talking about in corollary, in a parallel way to what my first point is, and that's now we're going to move into the preparation for your cross-examination. I've broken this down into steps, but you're going to see that it's not until step 6 or 7 that we actually even start talking about the witness themselves. Because I think that when you're preparing for cross-examination, and I'm assuming that we're talking about cross-examination of fairly major witnesses in your case, the defendant corporation, the police officer, if it was a case where that witness was going to be super important, somebody who's a fairly major witness. Your strategy for that witness can only be defined in the context, properly, in the context of the whole story of the case, right? Because if you go cross-examine and get all kinds of great points that don't actually advance at the end of the day your story that you're planning to present to the jury, then what good have you done? Even if you've done it masterfully, even if you got the Matlock moment, but the person killed the wrong person, you get the point. So we need to be thinking at the front end in how you define what your win is for the examination. You have to first start more broadly. What's my case about? And I would be remiss if I didn't take a few minutes to talk about what I mean by what your case is about, because when I see things on listservs and people call me to start telling me about a case, a lot of times it's what they're telling me is about the intersection and about the red light, and it's a red light, it's a green light, it's a wreck, it's a lane change, and they're talking about the incident, the incident wherein the injury or fatality occurred. And I just want you to start bringing some intentionality to what you want and need the story of the case to be about. And in my world, it's usually not the wreck. It's usually, if it's a red light, green light case, I can always lose a red light, green light case, because no matter what I do, no matter how brilliant I am in my work, somebody might think it's red and somebody else might think it's green. But what happens if I move the time frame of the case and I back up 5 minutes, or I back up 5 days, or I back up 5 months or 5 years? My client's not even in the picture anymore. If it's a case where they're blaming my client for doing something wrong, if I move the frame from the site of the wreck to the site, or think about it in scenes like Josh Carton and Jesse Wilson and people like that will tell you to do, in that scene where the truck driver is being trained, your client's nowhere in the picture. Really hard to blame your client for anything having to do with the training of the truck driver. Really hard to blame your client about the decisions of the trucking company to hire, supervise, release, retain the driver. Choices about their equipment, choices about the types of training modules and the types of systems that they have to manage their drivers on the roadway. Very hard to say your client had anything to do with that. So moving the time frame, shifting the question of where responsibility lies from the driver at the scene to the corporation in other ways. Let's see, I've had some other notes here. I would say what I've written down here is that I like to think about anything that the defense is doing that feels unfair to me. I'm getting another comment here that I'm maybe cutting in and out. So I hope that that's not, I think it's not me. Okay, so other people are saying it's fine. So, so where I was is I like to make essentially a running list of anything that I feel is being done unfairly in the case, or that is unfair, positions that are unfair by the defense. Sometimes it's about the way, sometimes it's things they're accusing my client of or trying to make my client into. Sometimes it's just the way they're defending the case, the lengths to which they'll go. Whatever it is that starts to piss you off about, about the case, instead of having the immediate reaction that I need to, as a lawyer, deal with that pre-trial, where I'm going to file a motion on that. I'm going to try to exclude that. I'm going to try to do something to make that go away and protect the client from it. Consider before you do that whether that can now be part of what your case is about. Because where you can do that, your case becomes about something pretty darn important and something that's pretty darn universal to people out there. Roger, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I always look at it this way. Juries look where you point. If you're pointing at the red light, they're going to make a decision one way or the other. It may not help you. If you're pointing at the training of the truck driver or the material on the truck or the condition of the truck, now they're looking in the right place for you.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's right. There's a time to point to your client, but that's well after liability's been established. And that's well after they've decided who's being fair, who's being honest, who's being realistic. Then and only then do I want to point to my client.